Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. We've looked into property investment from a variety of angles on this show in the past, and bankers, financial advisors, and even representatives from the National Housing Agency have touted property as still a great investment vehicle despite changing environments.
People in their 20s should really be looking at futuristic investments. They should be looking at acquiring a house.
Botswana Housing Corporation is now ready. It is now ready to go ahead and provide housing for Botswana.
Where an individual wants to purchase an existing property, we're able to offer them finance to facilitate that. There are instances where somebody has a plot and they would like to develop and actually have a house on that plot. We're able to facilitate in those instances.
I think it's more important for the person in their 20s to actually start saving and buying their house and acquiring assets. It's far more important than it was during our time.
We continue in this vein tonight, this time looking at the sprouting of gated communities in our increasingly urbanizing city. Interrogating the reasons for the growing number of these projects, having wondered whether their growth is spurred by growing security concerns in the city, the desire for exclusivity, or even the desire for community within a city that becomes less and less cohesive as it continues to grow. From modest and thatched constructions not so long ago, lovingly decorated in traditional patterns, to the manicured lawns of these contemporary urban villages, complete with recreational amenities. Housing in Botswana has changed quite a bit in a short space of time. The book City Limits, Crime, Consumer Culture and the Urban Experience by Keith Hayward says that what these projects offer investors is product identification and clear identity in a crowded and competitive new home market. Meaning that instead of sifting through existing properties of varying quality or taking on the load of building from scratch yourself, a consumer is now offered a finished and clear product close to their specifications and in an already aesthetically pleasing neighborhood to boot. Tonight we hear from a local player as to the reasons behind the growing popularity of gated communities in Botswana's urban areas. Thanks for staying with us. Our guest this evening is property developer Joel Emmanuel, who has capitalized on the growing appetite for gated community living through the construction of several projects. He tells us what his company considers to be the philosophy behind gated communities.
As the developers of Louisville, we want to encourage communal living at the most affordable cost. As you know, in Gaborone, houses are expensive now, land is expensive, people are traveling from far out to come and work in the city. That's where we come in. We want to develop land at the most affordable rates and provide good communal living spaces. Here in this estate, we have common parks, a pool house, a games room, gym, common facilities that the people living here can use. We also want to encourage communal living where people get to know each other, where your kids grow up with other kids. It provides for a better living experience, and that's where we come in.
In other countries, gated residences are increasingly considered elite communities, affording both prestige and security to the rich and famous. In the United States, megastars the likes of Justin Bieber, Jennifer Lopez, Kim Kardashian West, and Will Smith have chosen to reside in such establishments. The proliferation of these elite communities has even given rise to conversations as to the social implications of separating the rich from the poor. Our guest tonight, however, contends that locally, gated communities are an affordable avenue for investment.
Given this estate, here it is low density in Gabs North and it's upmarket. Given that we are providing common facilities, parks, pool house, clubhouse, 24-hour security, enough of parking spaces, common roads, all of this included, we are still the cheapest in Gabs. So in that regard, this is affordable. But to address your affordability point for the citizens of Botswana, we also have projects that are coming up in Broadhurst, in Mogadisane, where we are offering apartments And we're going to price the apartments 30% cheaper than anything available here, again, given the facilities that we are providing. It'll have common security, it'll have your pool house, clubhouse, things like that, that you don't get in other developments, and definitely not at the price that we are offering. That's where we come in to address the affordability.
How receptive have Botswana been when being pitched such projects, seeing that it is one that many may have been unfamiliar with?
It's actually been brilliant. When you are spending an hour in traffic, you start to realize that it's better to find something in the city. Secondly, the space that we offer with the common areas, open style living, as you can see, we can walk around this project and we can walk around our other projects. There's enough of open space. There are enough of common areas. So you don't feel that you're lacking your personal space. And in this project as well, we've had a lot of Botswana buying in this project because they can see that. Another unfortunate thing is that, as you know, crime is becoming an issue here in Gabs, and it is being addressed, and people do what they can, the government does what they can. But it is becoming an issue, and that's where the local citizens, the Botswana, have approached us to want to live in gated communities, but because they feel safer, they have their kids that feel safer.
As the options as to where and how to go about acquiring a home increase, what advice does Mr. Emmanuel have for our viewers when it comes to buying a residential property?
There are a few very key points to look at. One, of course, is the price, which every client will definitely look at. The other is the competitive loan rates that you get in the market, which currently is very tight because of liquidity. The banks are struggling because of liquidity crisis in Gabs, but that will ease up. That's only a cycle, that's an economic cycle, and that will ease up. That will allow customers to get loans for their houses. The other is the location. Now, when people are living in the city, they have to travel from far out. Location becomes very crucial. Because today, as you can see, the roads coming in from Magdisane, the roads coming in from Francistown, they're packed. The roads going out in the evenings are packed. So people are stuck in traffic that's unproductive. So location becomes very key. They need to live in the city, especially if they're working in the city. And that's where we come in. We have prime properties in the city, and where we develop at these affordable prices that we are talking about, and we address this.
Many of these communal housing projects involve consumers purchasing a unit in a project that is yet to be fully constructed, referencing maybe a visual plan and one fully constructed show house. What happens if, in the end, an investor does not get what was promised? What recourse do I have as a buyer if I realize that the developer took shortcuts and compromised the structural efficiency of the house I just bought?
In our purchase and sale agreement, we have a warranty period which we stand by. So the customer or the client is safe from that regard. The second is, when we have issues, like in Block 8, we had an issue with the paint contractor. We tried to take that up and sort that out. They went to their supplier and they could not, nothing came out of it. We are doing it at our cost. We are making sure that the entire compound is redone with their paint issue. The reason why we do that is because we want our brand to last. We have a very long-term outlook on Gaborone and Botswana. And to ensure that that long-term outlook is met, all we can do is make sure that we protect our brand. And in doing so, we make sure that we provide good structural integrity with our properties, good finishes, and make sure that it's all maintained well. And that's where the homeowners association comes in. They make sure that the external part of the compound is maintained well. All the external outlook of all the houses is maintained well. We as developers, we can do our best to provide a good house with good finishes and with strong structural integrity.
As with many of our previous guests from within the business community, Joel encourages consumers not to take out loans for depreciating assets, but to invest in property.
We want to encourage people to invest in housing. We want to encourage people not to go out and take personal loans to spend in depreciating assets or in liabilities. We want them to encourage to invest in a house. What we can do as developers is to provide affordable housing so that they can invest in these houses. As you know, from our previous projects from Block 6, Block 8, and even in this, people see a lot of capital appreciation. People see rental income. We want to encourage the Botswana to invest in this, invest in rental incomes, and invest for capital appreciation.
What are your views? Are you sold on the idea of investing or even living within a gated community? Share your thoughts and even experiences on our YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter pages. Next on the show, we continue our series on food safety. Welcome back, and on to our second feature on First Issues this evening, in which we continue our conversation with food safety specialist Nina Hamid. Last week, both the commercial businesses and households were educated on how to safely and correctly stock and defrost refrigerated food, measures which have notable economic and health implications on a number of levels. Tonight, Nina reveals that there are even more considerations to be made about the food we put into our freezers.
If you're putting anything into the freezer, it should be airtight. So if you're buying sealed containers, they're already airtight. If you happen to open a packet or you've bought some meat and you want to freeze it yourself, you should make sure that you again put it into an airtight container, not just wrapping it with plastic film or when you buy, say, mince from a butcher's shop, they'll put it into one of the polystyrene trays and put a cover on it. If you just put that into the freezer, you'll find that the meat will start to get frostbitten. There'll be a buildup of ice on there. And that takes away the flavor and the taste of the food, but it also makes it more unsafe when you're defrosting it because there'll be more moisture released and more juices being released. So the bacteria have the chance to grow. Because when you put food in the freezer, the bacteria just become dormant. They don't get killed off. Only cooking will kill off the bacteria.
When it comes to the storage of dry grains such as rice, our guest says that it is important to know that certain bacteria can lie dormant on them until after they have been cooked.
This certain bacteria called Bacillus cereus, it protects itself and if it's under sort of unideal conditions. So when it's in the dried stage, that bacteria could be present on the rice or cereals, and while it's in the dried stage, it's dormant. But once you've cooked the rice, you've obviously introduced the heat, the temperature and the moisture and all of those things. And if you leave that cooked rice sitting in warm conditions, we call it the danger zone, and that's between 5 and 63 degrees centigrade. That's why we keep the food either below 5 degrees in fridge or above 63 if it's hot food to be served. Once you've cooked the rice, you should either cool it if you're going to serve it cold, like make a rice salad or something. And the beauty of rice is you can cool it down immediately just by pouring cold water on it. You can't do that to a stew or a roast chicken, but with rice you can cool it immediately. If not, you cook it and serve it hot as soon as possible after cooking it. And there's no need to do advanced preparation of rice. It only takes 10 to 15 minutes to cook rice. So people tend to start cooking the starches before they've even started cooking the protein foods like the meat dish. They'll cook the rice thinking, oh, I'll cook that and get it out of the way. But then it's sitting in that warm kitchen all that time, and that's where the risk comes in. So keep it hot or keep it cold.
Having comprehensively explored safer ways in which to purchase and store food products, next we move on to the subject of safe food preparation.
As I mentioned about separation of raw and cooked foods at all times, that also includes when you're preparing the food. So if you're using a chopping board to cut up your meat or your chicken, you should then wash that board and the knife before you start preparing anything else on it, or have separate boards for, now doing like your onions and tomatoes and peppers that you're going to put into the dish that you're preparing. So there should be a separate board for doing your meat preparation and then another board for doing your vegetables and other products. So when it comes to using vegetables, for example, the vegetables which are going to be eaten without heat treatment, so mainly your salad vegetables, your lettuce and cucumbers and tomatoes, you need to make sure you wash them thoroughly before consuming them. Even when they have been packaged as pre-washed and put into containers like we can, unfortunately the supermarkets and consumers, we're getting lazier with food preparation. we are depending on pre-prepared stuff so that we can just open the packet and eat it. And that is not always safe, because maybe the food handler who was packaging those beautiful mixed bunch of lettuce leaves in your packet had dirty hands, or maybe the container was contaminated. The surface they were preparing on was contaminated. So it's better to re-wash it before consuming it. And with the root vegetables, because they're grown under the soil, you know, and there'll be bacteria on them, obviously wash them and then peel them and then cook them. Certain things you can eat, you know, with the peel on. You don't have to remove the peel, but just make sure that it is washed properly. So that's with the vegetables. And then with the meats, I've already mentioned keeping them separate. So if you've cut chicken on this board, you now can't go and start preparing your sandwich on the same board, or start even cutting your beef on the same board. You should wash in between. And then comes the stage of actually now cooking. You need to make sure you cook at the right temperature for the right length of time. So if the dish calls for you to, you know, bring something up to the boil, then bring it to the boil, then you reduce it to simmer it to make it, you know, cook evenly, and keep it stirred so that you're distributing the heat correctly. And that will ensure this, you know, safe production of that food as well.
Kopano Bolokwe from Botswana Stock Exchange now gives us a review of stock market performance as at 30th of June 2015.
The year 2015 has been a very tremendous year for the BSE. If you speak, looking at the value of shares traded, or the turnover as we call it, or the number of shares that were traded so far in the year, or volumes as we call it. Also, it has been a very good year in terms of price movements as depicted by the appreciation in the DCI. As at the end of June 2015, or the end of quarter 2, the BSE had traded a remarkable 1.5 million pula worth of shares. And the total volume or number of shares that exchange has amongst investors amounted to around 400 million pula. And what you notice is that this came on the back of activity by, or transactions by, institutional investors, especially local fund managers, obviously acting on behalf of the local pension funds, who accounted for the majority of the transactions. Also, worthy of note is the fact that some of the companies which were heavily traded were the likes of Letshego, Sefalana, FNB, as well as Choppies, which accounted for turnover in excess of 100 million pula, each one of them. The domestic company index, or the DCI, had risen by 10.5% as at the end of June 2015. And this obviously came on the back of share price movements in the positive direction by most of the companies which are listed on the domestic board. In fact, only about 3 companies experienced negative share price movements out of 22 companies which are listed on the domestic main board. So this is to say that investors also have had a very good year in terms of the performance of their investments or their portfolios in shares. ETFs, or exchange traded funds, also have had a very good run so far in 2015. We are speaking about the New Gold ETF, the New Plat ETF, and the Beta Beta ETF. These are instruments which typically track price of underlying assets such as commodities. If you speak about the New Gold ETF, which tracks gold, or New Plat, which tracks platinum, or if you speak about the Beta Beta ETF, which tracks the top 40 shares which are listed on the JSE. So if you look back from the time that we started listing ETFs in 2010, where we started listing the New Gold and then the Beta Beta in 2011, the New Plat in 2014, the BSE has cumulatively crossed the 1 billion pula mark in terms of the turnover generated in these instruments. But as at the end of June 2015, the turnover in ETFs amounted to just over 400 million pula, with the most traded ETF being the Beta Beta ETF. Also, in respect of ETF, the share prices have done very, very well, which is to say that they've also gone a long way in creating value for investors, especially since the time of listing. In the bond market, turnover also reached record levels, especially if you look at the turnover of government bonds, which was just closer to 650 million pula. Now, this is quite sad in the sense that government bonds are only traded through primary dealers at commercial banks and are not traded at the BSE. The only bonds which are traded at the BSE, being the corporate bonds, were very liquid. They did not impress on a year-to-date basis. In overall, it has been a very good year for the BSE. If you look at the fact that equity trading reached very high levels, in fact, the record levels compared to corresponding periods in the previous years or since inception of the BSE. ETFs have continued to do very well for investors as well as the activity in the bond market, which also saw an improvement. But what is really important, or what really matters to us, is the BSE, the extent to which we are able to sustain and improve these levels of trading activity. I could confidently say that the BSE has put together a number of initiatives which are aimed at reaching out to investors in order to try and encourage them to take part in the stock market, in order to try and get them to explore investment opportunities available for them on the stock market. So take your time to visit your broker, learn about the investment instruments listed on the exchange, explore how they can add value to your investment portfolio of cattle, houses, and so forth. And remember, we always say that you can start small and build your investment portfolio over time. From the BSE, thank you.
That brings us to the end of our program. Tune in same time, same place next week for more issues of interest. Until then, I, Nametso Samagula, the team behind First Issues, and our sponsors, First National Bank, wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.